Hey again, this is Jason Spitzer, and I'm in a bathrobe this time. I was surfing the internet, and lately I've been in a Final Fantasy VII craze in the sense that I got Crisis Core for the PSP. And I've been looking up information about Final Fantasy VII and Final Fantasy in general as far as the gameplay and whatnot. And I found out something very, very interesting. Final Fantasy VII is not allowed to be sold in the US at all. Final Fantasy VII is not allowed to be bought in the US from companies like GameStop and EB Games and Play It Again Sports. I'll tell you what. In 2005, when the whole we gotta stop terrorist crazes were going on, President Bush decided to investigate video games, and so did the Department of Homeland Defense. And they found that Final Fantasy VII, because of the fact that Cloud, in the beginning, plants a bomb in a power plant in a massively populated city, is in short encouraging the acts of terrorism. And so that was one of the reasons. The other reason is because the group Avalanche that was mentioned in the game as the terrorist organization that Cloud and Barrett and Tifa were working under is actually in the real world. Earth is a real terrorist organization in Kyrgyzstan, or some country in the near Russia that ends with a stan. I think it's Kyrgyzstan, honestly. I think that's how you pronounce it. Called Avalanche. The terrorist group is called Avalanche. If you want to know if this is true or not, simply go on Google and type in Final Fantasy VII banned from being sold in the US. And you'll come up with some blog forums that repeat the official statement from the government of why Final Fantasy is banned. And it will say something to the effect Bush decided because the fact that Cloud was bombing a city. And then it will say a quote that Bush had. Bush said, Mario doesn't blow up power plants. And then also there's a quote from Hillary Clinton that says the game is an awful video game. I mean, just look at the size of Tifa's breasts. You know, they're confusing and ruining the minds of our children. Stupid stuff like that. And a lot of people wonder why Final Fantasy VII, the remake trailer that was released about a few years ago, the one for the PlayStation 3, wonder why not a lot of new content is released, another trailer, any official release dates or anything like that. Well, think of it this way. Final Fantasy VII, the original, is banned from being sold or bought in the United States. Basically means that you can no longer go to an EB Games, GameStop, Play It Against, Play and Trade, Walmart, Target, Circuit City, Best Buy, pretty much anywhere, and buy a copy of Final Fantasy VII. You cannot take your used Final Fantasy VII disc to like a Play It Again, to like a EB Games or GameStop or a Play and Trade that actually takes old PlayStation 1 games. You cannot trade that game in. It is on the do not accept list as a banned game that they cannot, because if they were to take the game in, they obviously couldn't sell the game because it would be illegal. Now, so if that's the case with the original Final Fantasy VII, then if Japan, Square Enix, were to make a remake, that means they could only sell Final Fantasy VII in Japan. Maybe Europe, a lot of European countries are following America's examples as far as banning certain things. So that would mean that they could not sell the game in the United States unless that the game was taken off the ban list, which is highly unlikely. The only other way would be to totally cut out any images or cutscenes or texts or references to Avalanche, terrorism, and basically pretty much most of the entire game could not be made, because the first part of the game is ultimately you doing a terrorist act and bombing a power plant in a city, a fictional city, however, but a city nonetheless. So the game would pretty much suck because they would have to cut out everything imaginable. So that is why the game for Final Fantasy VII, the PlayStation 3 version, will probably never come out unless there's heightened negotiations between Square Enix and Sony PlayStation of Japan and America, the divisions of both of those, to actually get the game off the ban list. I'm not defending President Bush's opinion or the Homeland Defense's opinion. I'm actually against it. I think that a remade version of the game would ultimately drive sales of Final Fantasy VII memorabilia and other merchandise and other video game versions of Final Fantasy VII. But I will say this, however, Final Fantasy VII, even if it was a remake, unless they were totally to redo the combat system, the gameplay, and a whole bunch of add-ons, the game would pretty much not be worth it. If it was if it was a sense a port, but just reskinned to have Final Fantasy VII, PlayStation 3 graphics and PlayStation 3 cutscenes, then the game would flop, in my opinion, because, you know, God knows how many times I've played Final Fantasy VII, and God knows how many hours I've wasted on Final Fantasy VII. Which also brings me to something else. Just thought of it here. If Final Fantasy VII is banned as a video game, would that mean that other media forms, Final Fantasy Crisis Core, Final Fantasy Advent Children, all the other God knows video games, I don't even know how many other video games for the Final Fantasy series there are, 7 series there are, even toys and keychains and memorabilia, wouldn't that mean that they would have to be banned too? That's a question if you want to ask this. And another thing I'm going to say, because God knows that I've gotten about 50 million death threats and all sorts of other stuff because of the videos that I lift, like insults, and because of the videos that I make. If you don't agree with my view on this video, keep in mind I'm not defending Bush or anything. I'm actually against him. I would like for the game to come out, but, you know, it's highly unlikely. Do not cuss me out on YouTube by sending me a comment or making a video response where you're just like, I'm a fucking retard, blah, blah, blah. I told you where to find it. Google Final Fantasy VII banned from being sold in the United States. You'll come up with a result. Don't threaten me. Don't threaten my life, blah, blah, blah. That's it.